Let's talk about the rules and processes involved in creating structure. Okay, and the first question is, who does what? It's still pretty common for web development teams to have no one who's explicitly responsible for creating structure. So what happens is that it typically lands in the lap of the developer, unless you happen to have a designer involved as well. In an ideal situation, you have an information architect on the team whose job it is to deal specifically with issues related to information organization and related to interaction design. But as time goes by, what I'm seeing a lot of is that the information architect role is slowly being folded into either design or development, which, may or may not be a bad thing depending on your perspective. But whether or not you have a specialist to address structure isn't really that important. What's important is that somebody needs to do it. Someone needs to own it, someone needs to be responsible for it, and it has to be addressed as a specific, unique concern. There are multiple ways to communicate structure, and those methods vary based on the complexity of what's being produced. For projects that have a very high volume of content and are using a strict hierarchy in terms of structure, text outlines are a lot of times enough to document architecture. Okay, it's nothing more than a basic outline, like what you see here, where major categories, subcategories, and subcategories of those subcategories are shown in a basic outline list. So in a lot of cases, if your hierarchy is very simple and straightforward, this is all you need. You can also use what's called a visual vocabulary, a term that was coined by Jesse James Garrett, who is the author of the book Elements of User Experience. His system for diagramming structures looks like this. This is an example of a very simple structure where under, a main screen, home screen, we have three categories: media, products, support. And under each one, there are varying types of content. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, but it's visual, okay? And it gives us a sense of how things are related to one another and how things are prioritized. And it also is very clear what is a subcategory of a main category. Visual vocabulary can also be used to diagram interaction variables. And here's what we mean by that. In this case, this version of visual vocabulary, I am coming from a different location. In this case, I'm continuing from a home screen. I hit a login page where one of two things happen. Either I log in successfully, which means I go through the regular login flow and I wind up at, let's say, latest news. Or if my login information is incorrect and the system says, nope, wrong username, wrong password, it sends me back to the login page to try again. That's a condition. That's a variable. It's an interaction that either is completed successfully or unsuccessfully. If I go on to latest news, now I have some additional options. If you look at 1A, that's called a conditional selector, which essentially means I have options available to me that are a result of me landing on this particular section of the app or the site. So one of those options may be, okay, once I get there, I have technical papers available to me. That's one of the things I can choose. Or maybe I can just go somewhere else. I can continue on to a member list. Okay, so it's very visual in the sense that it helps you visualize what the process is, but it shows the variables. We're not only documenting artifacts and pieces of information, we're also documenting the flows and processes that allow us to access those pieces of information. In a case where we have a very high volume of content, in a hub and spoke type situation where we start from a central hub, we move out to a spoke to read, absorb, manipulate, act on things, and then we return back to the hub. For that type of project, we typically use diagrams that look like this, that show us the central hub, which in this case is producers, and the related spokes. And in some cases, as you can see in this larger version, some of those spokes have multiple areas and multiple choices and multiple pieces of information as well. Sometimes the spokes have sub-spokes where you can venture out and come back. So this is just another way of visually representing what happens. Here is yet another example of a visual diagram. This one is called a decision path, okay? Which from left to right, it starts with who the audience is. In this case, this is a prospective insurance agent. And when that person hits the first screen of the site or the app or the system, you ask yourself, what are the questions that they have? What are the things that they need to be able to do? In this case, it's how do I get contracted? What products can I sell? What are the ratings for these products? And as you move from left to right, you expose what choices exist in each one of the options that the person may choose. So it's a decision path. What do I need to see, and how does that motivate me to act? What might I do next? The point is that diagrams, no matter what kind they are, should always focus on relationships between content. What categories go together? Which ones don't? How do the steps in an interaction sequence fit together? How do people move through this information? How do we expect them to move through the information? And quite frankly, how do they expect to step through this information? All those things are very important, but it's critical that in whatever format you choose, you document this in some way so that you can think through the process.